At my cousin's engagement dinner, I wasn't a guest. I was the warning label. That's what it felt like when Kendall raised her glass, looked directly at me, and said with a syrupy smile, "I just hope I never end up like Maya, single, with a kid." The laughter that followed wasn't polite. It was cruel. It rolled across the room like a wave of applause for her perfectly timed jab. My Uncle Marty let out a cackle and smacked the table, sloshing his drink. "Men don't want dented goods," he shouted, as if he was offering wisdom, not insult. Then came the next punch. "She had so much potential once," Kendall's mother, Aunt Gina, sighed, placing a perfectly manicured hand on Kendall's back. "Such a shame." I didn't move, not even a flinch, but inside I was unraveling. My face flushed with heat, the room blurred around the edges, and I tried to focus on anything else: my wine glass, the flickering candle, the knot in my napkin. Then, from the kids' table, I caught it. A glance. Liam. My son, my reason, my light. 8 years old, sitting at a too-small chair, clutching a red crayon. He wasn't laughing. He was staring at me, puzzled, like he could feel something shift, even without knowing the words. I gave him a smile, fragile and forced, but he grinned back without hesitation, waving his picture in the air. I think it was a dinosaur with sunglasses. God, I didn't deserve him. Back at the table, Kendall was still talking, still glowing under the attention. Her fiancé, Zach, sat beside her looking like a mannequin, hands folded, face unreadable. He hadn't laughed, not once, but he hadn't said anything either. My mother sat next to me, stiff as a statue. She hadn't defended me. She never did. She leaned in once, whispered through clenched teeth, "Just let it go. Don't ruin the evening." Ruin it? Wasn't it already ruined? For me? Every eye that wasn't focused on Kendall was darting toward me. They tried not to be obvious, but I could feel it. The pity, the judgment, the sheer satisfaction of seeing the bad examples stay silent. I was the cautionary tale in their family folklore. The girl who got pregnant in her 20s. The one who didn't get married. The one who worked late shifts and still couldn't afford a vacation. But what they didn't know was what I had survived. What I had sacrificed. The nights Liam had fevers, and I held him upright in the shower at 3 a.m. The birthdays I skipped dinner so he could have cake. The jobs I lost because I refused to leave him with strangers. They didn't see any of that. They saw a failure. They saw someone who couldn't keep a man. The steak on my plate went cold. The laughter faded. Kendall moved on to a new topic: honeymoon destinations and whether Bora Bora was too basic. But the damage was done. Zach stood up. No one noticed at first. He didn't clink a glass or clear his throat. He just pushed his chair back and walked slowly, not out, not toward the bar, but toward me. And that's when the energy in the room shifted. Forks froze midair. Aunt Gina's mouth hung open slightly. Kendall blinked. Zach stopped directly beside me, and for the first time I looked up into his face. He didn't look angry. He looked focused. "I think they should know something," he said. And just like that, the noise died. The party screeched to a halt without a single sound. No music, no laughter, just 20 people suddenly forgetting how to breathe. I blinked, unsure whether to brace myself or bolt. Zach's voice was calm, but it carried. And as he turned from me to the rest of the table, I knew whatever came next would not be what any of them expected. They told me I ruined my life before I even held my son in my arms. That was the first thing my mother said when I told her I was pregnant. No questions, no comfort, just judgment, cold and sharp. "You make your bed, Maya," she snapped over the phone. "Don't expect anyone to help you lie in it." I was 26, scared, alone, and suddenly completely untethered from the only people who were supposed to catch me when I fell. When Liam was born, no one came to the hospital. No flowers, no balloons, just a nurse with kind eyes and a paper cup of lukewarm coffee. I held my newborn son in a room that smelled like bleach and silence and whispered a promise into his ear: "You'll never feel unwanted. Not like this." The next few years were survival, plain and raw. I worked nights at a diner, the kind with sticky menus and the smell of burnt oil clinging to your skin. I'd come home at 3 a.m., collapse into bed with my shoes still on, and be up at 7 a.m. for online classes. I was chasing a degree in IT with one hand while holding a baby bottle in the other. There were days I thought I wouldn't make it. Not because of the work, because of the weight. The weight of being unseen. Of being dismissed by the very people whose approval I once craved. My family never visited. Not on birthdays. Not on holidays. They sent gifts to Kendall. They sent silence to me. Kendall, the golden girl. She graduated from NYU, interned at some fancy startup in San Francisco, and came home with Zach, the man they all called a jackpot. "You should be more like Kendall," my aunt once said at Thanksgiving, as if I hadn't been standing right there, mashing potatoes with blistered hands. "She's smart enough not to throw her life away for a boy." What they didn't know, what no one knew, was that Zach and I had crossed paths before the engagement rings and silk table runners. It was 3 years ago, late December. I had just finished a double shift. Snow was falling sideways. I stopped at a 24-hour gas station for cough syrup. Liam was sick, wheezing in his sleep. That's when I saw him. Zach. Slumped against the ice machine outside, face pale, tie askew, fingers red from the cold. His coat was gone. He reeked of whiskey, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. I almost walked past him. I was tired. I was broke. I had a sick kid waiting for me at home. But something about his eyes, they weren't wild. They were empty. "You good?" I asked. He didn't answer right away, just muttered, "Didn't think anyone would notice." I took him home. I gave him a blanket and a cup of tea and let him sleep on the couch. I didn't know his name then. Didn't ask. All I knew was that he needed help. And I couldn't stomach the idea of leaving someone outside to freeze, no matter who they were. He stayed 2 nights. I learned he'd just been laid off from a tech job, visa in jeopardy, relationship in shambles. His fiancée had ghosted him. Friends stopped picking up. His family told me to man up. I helped him fix his resume, connected him with an old classmate at a security firm, sent him off with a coat from the donation box at church. He left a note on my fridge. "Thank you. I'll never forget this, Z." I didn't see him again. Not until he showed up beside Kendall at a family barbecue last summer with a ring and that same quiet sadness behind his smile. And still, I said nothing. Because that's what I'd been taught to do. Endure, swallow, survive. But now he was walking toward me in front of everyone, eyes blazing with something that felt like fire. And for the first time in years, I wondered, was he here to burn it all down? He was going to kill himself that night. Zach never said it outright, but I saw it in the way his hands trembled as he clutched that crumpled letter, in the hollow stare that never quite focused, and in the way he thanked me for a sandwich like it was the only kindness he'd known in months. I was at the gas station to grab cough syrup and microwave oatmeal. Liam had a fever, and my paycheck had just bounced. I was running on fumes, gas, energy, and hope. I didn't have space for anyone else's crisis. But there he was, leaning against the red box machine like he couldn't remember how to stand. His tie was soaked with sleet, and he was mumbling something under his breath. A folded piece of paper dangled from his hand like a flag of surrender. Normally, I would have kept walking. Not my problem, not my night. But something in me paused. I stepped closer. "Hey, you okay?" He looked up, and I swear to God, I saw a man who had already decided he didn't matter. His eyes didn't hold fear. Just absence. "No one cares," he mumbled. "I'm done pretending they do." He smelled like whiskey and snow. His coat was missing. His knuckles were scraped. The paper in his hand? A breakup letter unsigned, with the words, "You always needed saving," scrawled across the bottom. I didn't ask questions. I bought 2 microwave burritos, a water bottle, and a small pack of bandages. I drove him to the cheapest motel I knew, the one where the sheets never fully dry and the heater rattles like it's mourning its own death. I handed him the key. "I'll check on you in the morning," I said. "Why?" he asked. "Because I'd want someone to do the same for my son someday." He stared at me like no one had ever said something so simple. The next morning, he was still there, barely, hungover, curled on the floor, shaking like something inside him was broken beyond repair. I made instant coffee, sat on the carpet beside him, and waited. It took 2 hours for him to tell me the truth. His work visa had been canceled after a mass layoff. His fiancée had walked out. He hadn't told anyone, not Kendall, not her family, not even his own. Because he'd learned that when things fall apart, people step back, not forward. I didn't think anyone would notice if I was gone, he whispered. I didn't cry. I'd learned to hold grief with a still face. Instead, I told him he could stay for a few days, just until he figured things out. He ended up staying 2 weeks. During the day, I taught him how to navigate freelance job boards. I rewrote his resume. I connected him with Marcus, an old colleague at a cybersecurity startup. At night, we sat at the tiny fold-out table in the kitchenette, sharing boxed mac and cheese while Liam showed off his rocket drawings. Zach would ask about Liam's favorite books. He'd fold his napkin in perfect thirds. And sometimes when he thought no one was looking, I'd catch him watching us, like he was witnessing a language he'd forgotten how to speak. He never tried to kiss me, never crossed a line. He just let himself be helped. The day he left, he gave me back the room key, slid a note into my hand and said, I don't know how to repay this. You don't have to, I told him. Just pay it forward. Help the next drowning soul. I figured I'd never see him again. Then came the barbecue last summer. There he was, Zach, standing beside Kendall, wearing a fitted blazer and a practiced smile. He didn't acknowledge me, not even with a nod. I thought maybe he was ashamed, or maybe he wanted to pretend that those 2 weeks never happened. So I let him. I watched as he slipped into their world like he'd always belonged there, polished, silent, safe, until last night. Until he pushed his chair back and walked toward me like the weight of 3 years had finally snapped. He had carried that debt in silence, carried it through every fake smile, every Sunday dinner, every toast Kendall made at his expense. And now, he was about to repay it, not with a thank you, but with truth, loud, public, and impossible to ignore. She saved my life, before any of you even noticed I was drowning. Zach's voice didn't rise, but it hit like thunder. Every fork stilled, every wine glass froze midair. The sound in the room collapsed, like someone had sucked the oxygen out. For a moment, no one breathed. He wasn't at the head table anymore. He had walked the full length of the room, past centerpieces and whispered judgments, and now stood beside me, his shadow cutting across the white tablecloth, like a line drawn in sand. Kendall stared at him, slack-jawed. What are you doing? I'm telling the truth, Zach replied. His tone was steel wrapped in velvet. He didn't look at her. He looked at the others. Aunt Gina, Uncle Marty, my mother, every cousin who had clapped and cackled when Kendall made me the punchline. You laugh at her like she's a cautionary tale, he said, scanning the room. But none of you know what she's survived. I felt the weight of every eye swinging to me. The room had always been cold, but now it was something else entirely. Tense, cracked open. She didn't ask for your approval. She never needed it. What she did was more than any of you ever bothered to do. She noticed. She helped. When I couldn't breathe, she gave me air. When I was falling apart, she handed me stability. No strings, no judgment, no questions. Aunt Gina coughed awkwardly into her wine. Zach turned to her. 3 years ago, I almost ended my life. I was unemployed, alone, and invisible. And while Kendall was too busy curating her Instagram feed, Maya took me in off the street. She fed me. She sheltered me. She got me a job. And she asked for nothing in return. Kendall's voice cut in, sharp and brittle. You're ruining everything. Zach turned to her at last, slowly, calmly. No, you did that the moment you invited her here just to humiliate her. You knew what she meant to me. You knew who she was. And you used that knowledge like a knife. Gasps erupted across the table. My mother dropped her fork. You knew? Someone whispered. Kendall's smile was gone. Her eyes flared. That was years ago. He was nobody then. And she was just being dramatic. Zach's stare was flat. She wasn't dramatic when she kept me alive. She wasn't dramatic when she paid for the motel I slept in, or when she stayed up fixing my resume while putting her son to sleep. The room was a still photograph of disbelief. And you, Zach continued, his voice a degree colder now, invited her here, not out of kindness, not out of respect, but as bait. You needed someone beneath you to feel tall. I stood up, but I didn't leave. Not this time. I looked Kendall in the eye. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I didn't give her the satisfaction of shrinking. You wanted to embarrass me? I said quietly. But all you did was expose yourself. Kendall's face twisted. You think you're better than me now? No, I said. I think I've always been better than the version of me you needed to mock. The silence wasn't fragile anymore. It was thick, almost violent. No one dared move. Even the server, who had just entered with the dessert tray, turned right back around. Zach took a slow breath. This isn't about taking sides. It's about facing the mirror. And I won't marry into a family that claps for cruelty. Kendall looked like a child denied candy. You said you forgave me, she hissed. I did, he answered. But forgiveness doesn't mean silence. Not anymore. And then he turned to me. Not for approval, not for permission. Just to stand, steady, beside me. I felt my spine straighten without effort. For once, I didn't feel like the outsider. I felt like the axis. Kendall took a step back, her voice low. So what? You want her now? Is that it? Zach didn't blink. I want to stand with someone real. That's all. A hush swept the room like a slow tidal wave, and deep inside me something finally settled. Not anger, not revenge, just truth. Spoken aloud, impossible to take back. I reached for my wine glass, took a sip, let the burn remind me I was still here. The night had cracked, but I hadn't, and neither had he. And across the table, my mother finally looked at me, not through me, and whispered something I hadn't heard from her in over a decade. Maya. But I didn't answer. Not yet. Not until I knew if she meant it. You can dress cruelty in silk, but it still stinks. That was all I said. 3 sentences. No yelling, no tears. Just truth, folded neatly into the kind of voice you use when you're finally done apologizing for breathing. I didn't look at Kendall when I said it. I looked at the space between us, the air she'd poisoned with every joke, every backhanded compliment, every smug glance passed across family tables for years. She flinched, just a little, but I saw it, and that was enough. Zach didn't move. He didn't step closer. He didn't reach for my hand. He just stood beside me, silent, steady, as if he knew this wasn't his story to finish. Around us, the room stayed frozen, like a photograph taken at the moment before glass shatters. Then, slowly, movement returned. My mother's hand trembled as she set her wine glass down. She didn't look at me, not at first. Her eyes were fixed on the white linen, on the condensation circle left behind by her untouched drink. She blinked once, then again, and finally she cried. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. Just a single tear, tracing a path down a face that had spent decades pretending to feel nothing. Then she rose, without a word, and left the table. No excuses, no redemption arc. Just the quiet sound of heels tapping across tile and a chair still swaying from her absence. I didn't follow her. I didn't need to. Forgiveness, I'd learned, isn't something you beg for. It's something you choose or don't. And tonight, I was choosing myself. Across the room, Kendall had sunk into her seat. Her hands were clenched in her lap, knuckles white, mascara smudging at the corners of her eyes. But no one was looking at her now. Not really. They were looking at me, the girl who'd walked in wearing borrowed shoes and shame-like perfume, now standing taller than any of them expected. And then I heard it. Small feet. Fast steps. Liam. He came bounding from the kids' table, his drawing clutched in one hand, his face lit up like the world hadn't just been ripped open and rearranged. Can we go home now, Mommy? He asked, eyes wide, voice soft. I knelt, smoothed his hair back, and smiled. Yes, I said, we can. That was it, no grand exit, no speech. Just a mother and her son, choosing peace over performance. I turned to gather my coat, my purse, the little pieces of myself I'd once scattered to survive this family. But before I could take a step, someone spoke. Maya. It was Aunt Valerie. She looked unsure, like she'd just woken from a long nap and wasn't sure which version of me she was seeing now. You're stronger than I ever knew, she said. I didn't respond, not because I was unkind, but because I didn't owe anyone a moment longer than I'd already given. We walked to the door, Liam humming under his breath, still waving his drawing in the air like it was something sacred. I paused once, just before stepping out, and I turned back not to the people but to the silence. The vacuum left behind when truth settles and denial has nowhere left to hide. I didn't need Zach to fix me. I didn't need Kendall to admit her cruelty. And I didn't need this family to rewrite the story they told about me. Because I already had something they never did. I had lived my truth, and I had done it without ever stepping on someone else's neck to breathe. As the door closed behind me, I felt something lift, something ancient and heavy. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was freedom. And the next step was mine to decide. They tried to make me feel like leftovers. I became the main course of my own life. The morning after the engagement party, I woke up not to dread, but to clarity. There were no angry texts from Kendall, no dramatic apologies from my family. Just sunlight on the window, the smell of instant coffee, and the quiet breath of Liam still asleep beside me. Peace doesn't always arrive with trumpets. Sometimes it just slips in while you're too tired to resist it. Later that day, Zach called. He didn't ask for a second chance. He just said, "I took my name off the house, and then, thank you for helping me remember who I was." We didn't need to say more. Some debts aren't about repayment, they're about release. A week later, I stood in front of a room full of strangers. Single moms, social workers, volunteers. I'd been asked to speak for a women's rights nonprofit that fought for housing, safety, dignity. I told them my story, not as a victim, but as someone who had survived her own family's silence. I spoke about the night no one defended me, until someone did. About how one truth, spoken aloud, can bend a room of cruelty until it snaps. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then a woman in the back, holding a sleeping baby, whispered, "Thank you." I thought it was just me. That's when I knew this wasn't about revenge. It was about recognition. Liam had drawn me a picture that morning. It was crumpled from his backpack, colored outside the lines, but it was everything. Two stick figures, one tall, one small, on a stage under yellow beams of light. Me and him. The caption he dictated for me to write at the top? "My mommy is brave." I hung it on the fridge. Some days, I still think about that dinner table, about the way silence used to feel like safety, about how long I stayed quiet just to be allowed to stay. But I also think about the door I walked through that night, how I didn't look back for permission, how I carried my son in one hand and my dignity in the other, and how that simple act, leaving without shame, was the loudest thing I ever did. Not every ending needs applause. Sometimes it only needs one honest witness. If you've ever sat at a table where your presence felt like a stain, if you've ever been the subject of laughter that didn't land like a joke, if you've ever wondered if surviving quietly was enough, I see you. You don't owe them softness for the hurt they delivered with a smile. You don't owe them your silence to keep the peace they never offered you. You don't owe anyone the version of yourself that fits neatly into their comfort. You owe you, your voice, your truth, your next breath free of their shame. And if this story cracked something open in you, if it reminded you of a moment you wish had gone differently, if it brought back the name of someone you once forgave silently, too early, tell me. Not because I need the comments, but because maybe, just maybe, you've been waiting for someone to ask. This is Revenge Her Way. Not with fire, not with fury, but with truth. If you've ever been the quiet one who finally stood up, the mother who didn't break, the woman who walked out with grace, subscribe, stay, be seen.